Hello and welcome to Lecture 2 in Module 8. We're going to continue on with our discussion of money from the first lecture. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering, Han who shot first? Of course, it's Han Solo. As you know, in the first Star Wars, maybe you don't know being not as old as I am, but when the first Star Wars movie came out, when Han Solo was being arrested by or captured by the bounty hunter, was going to take him to Jabba the Hutt, Han Solo shot him to get away, and then Lucas went back later, and then later, he changes his movies. He changed it so Han Solo didn't shoot first, because that wouldn't be nice, and he's a good guy, and which sort of ruins the scene. But us traditionalists will never accept that. We always believe that Han shot first. All right, so we're talking about money. And eventually we'll get to how money affects aggregate demand and putting it in the aggregate demand curve and all those things you have grown to love to do with diagrams and math. But for now, we're just talking about the story of money. Before I get back to the story of money, I want to tell you that when we talked about money being what you use to buy things or sell things for, that role of money is called the medium of exchange. Money is what we exchange for goods and services in official stores, but also just with our friends too. Because we use it to exchange for goods and services, we call it the medium of exchange. Once something becomes the medium of exchange, it takes on two other attributes or properties too. One is called the unit of account. It's how you measure prices. It is, if I say, how much is that TV at Albertsons, you tell me in dollars, and I understand. The Europeans used to, all their individual countries had their own individual currency. The Germans had the German mark, the French franc, the Italian lira, and because Europe is so close to each other, the countries are, you could go to multiple countries in a day, but it was hard to compare, say, television prices, because you were told the television price in Germany in marks, in France in French franc, in Italy the lira, and then you had to convert into some common account. One reason they then gave up their individual money to use the current money throughout Europe, which is the euro, is that when all prices in Germany, Italy, France are quoted in euros, you can instantly compare. So it's convenient for us. All prices in the US are given to us in dollars, and thus we can easily compare which store has the thing cheaper. And then the other function of money, we have medium of exchange, we have unit of account, it is a store of value. It is a way of savings. I've talked in this class before about cash in the cookie jar. It is convenient to have money saved because money is very easily spent. That's the whole definition of money. It's easily spent. Why have cash in the cookie jar? Because you can buy something at a moment's notice. Whereas IBM stock, you cannot buy something at a moment's notice. All right, so we talked last time about commodity money, where the money you're using is salt or gold. It's something that would, even if it wasn't money, if it was just the thing itself, would have value. And then fiat money, that in general is something that has no value except the government has made it the money. And as I mentioned last time, it's not actually that the government tells us it's the money that makes it the money, it's that we believe them. And I pointed out a couple examples. There are monies that function that no government says this is money, like cigarettes in prison. There is money that the government says this is money, like the $2 bill, but people don't want it, and so it doesn't work as money. But in general, when the government says, this is money, people believe them, and then that has a big impact that psychologically they will accept it as money. So at one time we had actual gold and silver coins in this country. Now we have just the paper and the coins that are made of valueless metals. And how did we get there? Usually, you can't get there in one fell swoop, because what would happen is if people are used to having coins made of gold and silver, that's their money. And in their mind, that's what money is. And then the government says, we're taking that away and giving you this paper and that's your money, people will not believe it. They will not accept it. They will continue to use the gold and the silver coins as money and not the paper. So in this country, we went through an intermediary step between actual gold and silver coins and paper fiat money that lasted a long time. And that intermediary step is called being on the gold standard or having a gold reserve. And the way that works is the government takes a bunch of gold and puts it in Fort Knox. And they have a law that says, we're giving you this paper to use as money, but whenever you want to, people, you can take a $20 bill and give it to us, and we'll give you an ounce of gold. The actual exchange rate wasn't quite exactly 20, but it was close enough. I'm just going to say 20. And when the government says you can freely exchange with them paper for gold and gold for paper, any value that attaches to the gold will attach to the paper. You'll never, if someone tries to pay you with a $20 bill, you'll never say, no, I don't believe in paper money. What you'll do is you'll take it, and then you'll immediately go and turn it into the government and get the gold. So the value that attached to the gold, the psychological belief that people had that gold was valuable, now transfers into believing these pieces of paper that can be turned into gold whenever you want to are valuable. But really, once you believe that paper has value, there's very little reason you would actually go and turn it in for gold. Now, certainly there's the old curmudgeon who lives at the edge of town who's always telling the kids to get off his lawn. And whenever he gets paper, he goes and turns it in. But most of us, just the knowledge we can do that whenever we want to, makes us comfortable with getting paid in paper and paying in paper currency and just using it all the time for all of our money needs. And what happens then is you get a generation that has grown up that in their mind, they've always used paper as their money. And they're sort of aware that they could turn it in for gold when they want to, but they really can't think of a reason they would want to. And so you have psychologically prepared people to think of paper as money. And then the government can come and say, we're removing the link, we're removing the gold reserve, or we're getting rid of the gold standard. From here on, the money is just the paper money. And if you want to know when we did that in the United States, you're looking at a slide that has the headline from the New York Times in 1933, from the day after the government did that, announcing that the government is, the gold standard's been dropped temporarily. I love that temporarily. I think most people realized it wasn't temporary. If it was, hey, we should be going on the gold standard any minute now, because that was, back in 1933. So how many years? 80 years, 70 years? But by saying it's only temporary, they can help calm people down. And ever since 1933, when Roosevelt did this in his first year as the president, thinking that he was helping to fight the Great Depression, whether he actually was or not, we'll talk about later. Ever since then, we have had the pure fiat money. So that's the story of money in general. Now let's get a bit more specific about what is money within the United States. And it's not always clear if something is money or not. So how much money is there? That question is not easily answered in that, as we've already discussed, our definition of money is a little fuzzy. That is, money is what is widely exchanged for goods and services, but what if it's not? What does widely mean? Well, we purposely leave that a little fuzzy. We say not every place takes a $100 bill, but it's widely accepted so that it's money. Because it is not always clear if something is money or not, when we talk about the specific dollar amounts that exist, we actually have different measurements. The most basic, the most foundational measure of money is called M1. And M1 consists only of cash outside banks plus the value of checking accounts. Cash inside bank vaults doesn't count as being money because it's not available for immediate spending. You can think of it this way: if there was an incredibly effective TV commercial that made you want to rush to the store and buy all you could of some product without going into debt, how much could you afford to buy? Well, how much cash do you have? And what's the value of your checking account? That's how much you could walk into the store and buy if the store was the first place you went. So that's the most basic definition of money. Then we have more liberal definitions of money, of which the only one you have to worry about in this class is M2. And M2, as a measure of money, is everything in M1 plus what are called near monies. And the most important of the near monies would be your savings account. Now, near money is something that is near to being money. And what makes you near to being money? Well, remember, money is what you can buy with. So something that's a near money is very near to being something you can buy with. And how do you measure how near something is? A very useful way to measure how near something is to being money is time. When I took this class back in the early 80s at Cypress Community College, Principles of Macroeconomics, I was taught that M1 was the best measure of money. The savings account weren't near enough to being money to be reasonably counted as money. And here's why not. So I go to Sears and I see a sweater that I want to buy and I take it up to the clerk. Again, this is the early 1980s. And I show it to the clerk and I say, and she says, this is $40. If I say, I have $40 cash, she says, congratulations, you can buy the sweater. If I say, I have $40 in my checking account, she says, good, got 2 pieces of ID, you can buy the sweater. If I say, I have $40 in my savings account, she says, that's interesting, but it doesn't get you the sweater. And I say, I know, but would you hold it for me? I'm gonna run down to my car and drive to the bank and wait in line and pull out $40 from my savings account and drive back and walk here again. I'll be back in an hour. The clerk says, okay, we'll hold it. And I'm back in an hour buying the sweater with the value of what was in my savings account. So how near was my savings account asset or value to being money? It was an hour away. I could buy something with the value of my savings account in an hour. And that was not considered to be near enough that you would reasonably call it money. Now let's jump ahead to the late 1990s. Now when I say to the clerk, I have $40 in my savings account, the clerk might say, oh, you know what, there's a ATM down at the middle of the mall. And I say, oh, good, hold the sweater for me. I'll be back in 10 minutes. And then I leave, walk to the ATM, pull out the $40 from my savings, come back, buy the sweater. Now my savings account was only 10 minutes away from being money. And we certainly seem to be heading to a world where almost all stores will have debit card readers and will have a debit card, and you'll be able to buy out of your savings account using that, instantaneously. And in that world, then of course savings accounts will be money. But even though we're not quite there yet, this advance in financial technology of even ATMs means that now the economics profession considers that savings accounts are convenient enough to buy with that we should count the money. We haven't moved them into M1. What we do is just, they've always been in M2. M2 is the value of cash outside banks plus checking accounts plus savings accounts. And as I say, back in the early 80s, I was taught M1 is the best measure of money. I am teaching you that M2 is the best measure of money because savings accounts have become so near to being money that it should be counted as money. And then there are also some money market accounts that are considered to be near monies too. But, it just in general, we're going to say M1 is currency outside of banks plus checks, and then M2 is everything in M1, and then add in savings accounts. Now, if you look at the value of M1 and M2. And a while ago, I probably should update this slide, but back 8 years ago, M1 was $2.2 billion. Actually, that's not right. It's $2,228 billion, or $2.2 trillion. If you look at this slide, you'll see that the biggest part of the value of money was checks. Checks were a bit more, there's a bit more checks in the world, the value of people's checking accounts, than the value of the cash people had. And remember, we're only counting cash outside banks because that's what's available for immediate spending. Cash inside banks is not available for immediate spending, though you could always pull it out of the bank and then it would become part of M1. And there's a couple other things that are part of M1. You might see traveler's checks down there. It's such a small amount, we don't worry about it. Money orders are part of M1. Such a small amount, you'll never be asked about it in this class. For this class, M1 is cash outside banks plus checking accounts. Now, when we look at M2, we see that M2 is much bigger than M1, about 4 times as big. $9,700 billion as opposed to $2,200 billion. And so when you look at that pie chart, M1 is only a quarter of what M2 is. And then most of M2 is the value of people's savings accounts. And it goes up. There's M3, and it goes all the way up to L6. I said it being the scale of measuring money. Though when we get to L6, we don't even call it M because we don't even think of it as money. It is the value, basically the value of all your assets. So that would include the value of your house, etc. We call it L because L stands for liquidity. You should know that's all, mention it. Liquidity is the ease of spending something. So money is the most liquid asset. Your house is a very illiquid asset. It's hard to turn the value of your house into beer. Easy to turn cash into beer. So it does go up to L6, but you don't have to worry about any of that. All you have to know is M1 and M2. All right. That's the basic story of money in 2 lectures. So next time we'll start talking about we'll bring banks into the system. We already talked about banks a little bit because we talked about savings accounts and that, but it's important to understand the interaction of banks and money in understanding macroeconomy. So that will be the starting point of lecture 3. Till then, take care.